Okay, we are back with a friend of all DAF, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brodt, who comes highly recommended even by Professor Schneur Lyman. So someone with credentials like that, we bring back to the show. We're here to discuss today, as we are beginning, we are a few days in, to Masechet Yoma. Let's discuss something on everybody's mind. Why is Masechet Yoma being learned now? If you open up your Bavli, Rosh Hashanah seems to come first in most editions. Some of the other things we hope to get to are, although we already discussed with Nachi Weinstein, a common friend of Seforim Chatter podcast, the relevant Seforim that are available and that are out there. We want to dig deeper into just a couple of them and discuss, as Yoma is a Kachim Masechta, how is Kachim learned throughout generations, and perhaps a couple of other surprises. Everybody's wondering, why is Masechtes Yoma being learned now?
Okay, so the first question of why Masechtes Yoma, if you look in Yeshas Bavli, it goes Rosh Hashanah first and not Yoma, and by Daf Yomi they'd learn Shkalim and Yoma. So what happened? Is there anything behind this? So interestingly enough, already way back, Rav Shiri Gaon in this incredible early document, which is important to study in general about the history of everything to do with Mishnayos, the Gemara. One of the questions that Rav Shiri Gaon was asked was, is there a seder to the Mishnayos, to the Mesechtes in the Masechta? Each seder, Masechta is their seder, and basically the question was specifically asked was, why is Matam Hegdimu Kippurim l'Shkalim? The lashon is Kippurim for this Masechta, referring to Yoma. And later on, he says that in his yeshiva, what did they do? They learned before Shkalim. They learned Shkalim before Kippurim, and pretty much
they actually learned Masechta by Masechta from the beginning. Okay, I'm interrupting you, but yeah.
No, it's exactly how they learned in the yeshivas is, you can learn a lot from learning Rav Shiri Gaon's Igris about it. It's a lot of information that could help one get a picture of what was done. The bottom line is that it sounds like from Rav Shiri Gaon, and he has this nice piece about it, that there's no, you can learn whichever way you want. There was no specific seder, so to speak. If Yoma should be first, or Shkalim should be first, or Rosh Hashanah should be first, or Yoma should be first. L'maisi, it sounds like in his time they did learn Yoma before Rosh Hashanah. Okay. The Rambam in his Hagdama also we find dealing with this question. In the Rambam, he says, why is Shkalim go before Yoma? Interestingly enough, it's only because in the Chumash, Mitzvah Shkalim is found in Parashas Kisisa, whereas Kippurim is in Achrei Mos. Afterwards, would go much later on in his list is Rosh Hashanah, and the Miri has a similar such type of list. Bottom line is that there are different lists besides the Rambam, besides Rav Shiri Gaon and the Miri, that have it the way we have it, so to speak, with Rosh Hashanah, like the Shas Vilna, so to speak, where there's no concrete Messiah one way or the other. Why Rav Meir Shapiro picked one way over the other? It's very possible because that's how he saw from the Hagdama to the Rambam and the Mishnayos, and that's how he chose to do it. L'maisa, the Chaykrim that are Isaac and these type of things, or Yaakov Nachum Epstein and Chanoich Albeck, they bring lists of the Seder both ways, so it doesn't really make a difference, but that's how it was, and that's how it is. And Daf Yomi, it's done al pi a Seder. It'll be very hard if some people are going to be doing Rosh Hashanah, some people are doing this, so they kept as a Seder to keep it.
Like we always see with Daf Yomi, it's nice to see Klal Yisrael get together and agree on certain mahalach.
Right. It's better, convenient, whatever, nothing more. Right. But one very tiny side point that you see over here is we call the Masechta Yoma, but in Rav Shiri Gaon already, and even in the Rambam, we see it's called Kippurim. So again, what was the original name of the Masechta? Again, the Yaakov Nachum Epstein and Chanoich Albeck, they bring different manuscripts that have different ways. Right away, the Marsha has a piece in the beginning of the Masechta, talking a drop about why it's called Yoma, but these are all these are side points.
I mean, a Maggid Shir won't spend that much time at the beginning of a Shir.
I highly doubt Maggid Shirim really spend time on these questions, but people ask them. It's worth to know that people ask them already way back, as far back as we're sure you're going to ask the question, but it's not like there's such a big thing behind it.
But Baruch Hashem, there are chokrim, as we like to call them, right? In Israel, all over the world, that spend a lot of time analyzing. Okay, so should we move on to the next topic, which is, I guess, Yoma is a Kachim Masechta. We don't find that many Rishonim. So maybe give us some background on Kachim Bechlal, Yoma, the Rishonim, how was it learned, before we get to what Seforim there are, or what specific ones you want to focus on in depth.
Okay, so some interesting things, like as follows. At first glance, when someone wants to know, in general, not only on this Masechta, what Rishonim there are in a Masechta, so there's a very useful tool. It was done, it's called Sari Ha'elef by Rabbi Menachem Kasher. Menachem Kasher, what he did was he collected all the Rishonim on each Masechta and put it into a volume. It has other things in it. These two volumes have other material also. And one opens it up, let's say Masechet Yoma, and you'll get a list of all the Rishonim that they are, where they're printed, when they were printed. They'll have sometimes if someone commented about them. So if you open up a Masechet Yoma, you'll see a nice list of Rishonim. So you'll say, oh, great. Masechet Yoma is like Baba Kama that has a lot of Rishonim, so I'm safe, so to speak. If I'm a Maggid Shir, careful analysis of the list will show that most of these Mefarshim, these Rishonim, do not go through the whole Masechta. And the question is why. Now, in general, it's known, people, especially today, many people spend a lot of time in Brisk. They know that there's not too many Seforim of Rishonim on Kachim. The question is why not? So some people say that the reason is because they were lost. They were written, but they were lost. Just to say a story that I've heard many times, Ben Azmanim in Eretz Yisrael, Yeshiva Bachim, they come into Hebrew University, and they heard the Hebrew University has many manuscripts, and they come looking for the cook, they want to find the Ritva or Rajba on Zvachim Menachos, and they envision that they're going to make a lot of money off it. Imagine if you find such a Chashav Rishon on the Masechta and you print it, maybe you'll put it in some Ha'aris, you don't even need to put it in Ha'aris, people will grab it to be a bestseller, and they don't realize, and they go ask, I've seen it myself actually, they go ask the different librarians, the people involved with this, and they laugh and they say, every year, the amount of people that ask this question, like you, no one thought of it up till now to look for it. Answer is, it's not there, there isn't. Now, was there ever? It seems, and that's what I'm about to say, is such that as far as we know, most of the Rishonim did not really write Perushim on Kachim. So the question is, why not? So before just to give you two very quick sources about this, we have an interesting letter preserved where the Rimigash was writing, where the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, wrote a letter on behalf of the Rimigash, trying to get Perushim on Kachim, and from other places. And in this letter we see, and what we see clearly is that in Svarad, at least early back in that time, the Rimigash that we were talking about, they did not have Perushim on Kachim. A little later on, the Rajva, Ramban, we do not have from them Perushim on Kachim. The Rush writes about he heard from, he calls this person Adam Gadol beBarcelona. He says this person was a great baki in 3 Sedarim. And in short, what came out from the Nusach over here was that this person was saying how he did not know Kachim, Zraim at all. That's what this person told the Rush. And as I said, the Rush said he was an Adam Gadol. So if the Rush is calling him Adam Gadol, I imagine he was someone that was Adam Gadol. Point being that there are numerous, many other Makairis that Kachim was not really learned. In Ephraim Kannenvogel has a beautiful article at length, both in Hebrew and in English, where he deals with it and tries to explain different aspects to it. We're not going to go into we're not going to go into it, but in short, one of the aspects is it wasn't halachic. It wasn't negeya for halacha, and there was a big focus on halacha l'maisa. Kachim is not arayim. It's not halacha l'maisa. Hopefully, will be soon, and therefore their focus was much more on the sedarim or the chalakim of Shas that was halacha l'maisa, such as chulin, the parts that relate to Bas v'chalav, Shchita, these things that was learned, and there is Torah of even the Chachmei Sfarad. But for the most part, it wasn't learned in the times of the Rishonim. What it means to say it wasn't learned, it wasn't written about. We see that they bring rayas from Kachim, Rishonim all over, but it wasn't learned on the same level, the same intensity as, let's say, Baba Kam, Baba Nsi, and the other Masechtas.
And I'm sure, just to interrupt, I think you get to it maybe towards the end, that the Chavetz Chaim wanted to make it halacha l'maisa, so he somewhat brought it back. But
correct. Meretz Hashem, Meretz Hashem. I hope to get to that shortly. But now in the yeshivas, and when I'm saying yeshivas, I'm not talking about recent yeshivas, but in yeshivas, let's say in the times of the early Achrayim, we do, from the evidence that we have of them, the Kachim was just not part. For the most part, was not part of the seder. There were very few achrayim. I'm talking about early achrayim even that spent time learning kachim or writing about it. And we'll get to it a drop more when we talk about Chavetz Chaim in this discussion. Mordechai Breuer, who wrote a monumental book about the yeshivas throughout the ages, he also documents pretty much kachim was not really learned. One place that we can mention that kachim was learned. One yeshiva, although even there, when it was learned, it does not mean that everyone was learning it, but it was learned, and shiurim were given on Kachim, was in Volozhin. We have the Netziv's shiurim, including on Yoma. He gave shiur on all these Meseches. But that was a very uncommon. Therefore, Yoma, although at first you open up your list and you see a long list, you'll see that most of these Rishonim and Mefarshim do not go through blot by blot on the Masechet. So are there any Rishonim that do go through the blot?
Okay, so now I guess you want to mention some of those Rishonim, and although like you mentioned at the outset, we went through what's there, what's available, give us a little bit of a history of some of the main Rishonim before you get to the Achrayim.
Okay, so first, I'm just going to mention a few different things, hopefully some interesting pieces, nothing
groundbreaking.
Yeah, nothing groundbreaking, and everything very bekitzer. So first of all, in 1714, we find that the Taisus Yeshanim, which if you open up your regular Gemara today, it's on the side, was printed. So without getting into who is the Taisus Yeshanim, it's very significant. In general, when one learns Taisvis, every nusach that we have of Taisus helps us understand. Extra words could help shed light, extra teretz, extra words to understand the kasha, anything people that today we're Zoicha, and a lot of Meseches we have, such as the Taisus Rush, they're just game changers in understanding Taisus. So Taisus Yeshanim already helped significantly when it was printed in 1714. Interesting tidbit interesting piece of information about it was that when Shas was being printed, the various times that Shas were being printed, let's say around 1714, when they wanted to print the Shas, they tried to print. One of the catches that they try to get people to buy was they would put in new stuff that didn't exist in previous editions. So today they always do such a thing. You always try to improve what was done earlier. So this in the introduction of the 1714 edition of the Shas, they list out a bunch of different milas that they have. One such edition they say is the Taisus Yesharim on Masechet Yoma, which is a significant thing. It's not like 3 little pages; it's throughout the whole Masechta. And where did it come from? It came from the great library of David Oppenheim, and mapped out in the books. And there's a recent beautiful book on the library from called Prince of the Press, where he has a few pages about this Shas, when this 1714 edition of the Shas, and how they went out of their way to get new material from this Chashav Library, David Oppenheim. He had Rishonim, so this was not the only Rishon that they incorporated into their Shas. So it was so they had an intention of putting it out to make it better, so it should sell. But in truth, it helped greatly because now Yoma had a Rishon. There was no other Rishonim ever printed on the Masechta. This is the first time. Now made Yoma more accessible for someone to learn it. A few years later, in the 1750s, someone printed from manuscript a sefer. Someone printed a sefer called Aryukaris. In the back of the sefer, he had the Ritva. But this work is very rare. Even today, I was looking a few days ago on Hebrew books, and Chachma, they have the Aryukaris, but they don't have a complete edition. So they do, which had in it the Ritva on Yoma. So you say that part was taken out, but it exists. Now, what's interesting is I said that what's interesting about the Ritva. I said that in Svarad, pretty much they did not really write about Masechet Yoma. They didn't write about Kachim. So here we have the Ritva on Yoma, and if you open up the Ritva on Yoma, it's a very thorough sefer. Now he does not quote Rambans and Rajbas, and from that his base Meseches that he's coming from, which is interesting. But more interesting is that the last parak of Yoma, which we hope to get to soon enough, which is the halachic part of that's Nagea today, not carbonistic. There he's very, we're there. A lot of the Rishonim that we do have plenty to say because it was halachic, and I said that the halachic parts they did write about. The Ritva there has very little. He writes very little. I don't know why, but I just found that very interesting. Anyway, these two Rishonim, the Taisus Yesharim and the Ritva, are technically in that period of time, if someone was learning the Masechta, those are the only things that existed. I'm pretty sure the Ritva is very rare, as I said, so I don't know how much of impact it really had, but the Taisus Yesharim is on the page, so already then it has impact. Now, these are these two things are Rishonim. We'll get back to another Rishon that is a very significant, important addition to learning Masechet Yoma. But first, let's go through one Achron. There's an Achron. Everyone, you go ask any person who learned Yoma before, they ask them which Achron, they say, oh, the Sechitzchak. The Sechitzchak.
Yes, we must mention that it's out of print and it's not available to buy in the Seforim stores, but as discussed in the Seforim Chatter podcast, it's available on Amazon for $7.99, and there's a link that we could attach and send out that you reach out to us to get it on Amazon Prime. Wow, Seforim on Amazon, unfound. Seforim not available. It's amazing.
You get it with Amazon Prime. You have it the next day. It's amazing what you can get these days in this world today.
Right.
Now, the significance of the Sechitzchak is as follows. Well, so I'm just going to talk a drop about the Sechitzchak. I'll just mention a few things. It's printed in 1766. The author, Rabbi Yitzchak Nunas, was a Dayan and he was a Makubal. He also wrote on Chagiga, which is in print, I don't know if it's available today. Hopefully by the time that Yemi gets up Chagiga, it will be available again. I'm pretty sure it's out of print right now. But now, what was significant about the Sefer? So much so that it becomes out of Yom from 1766. It's the go-to Sefer on the Masechet. So there's a few points to mention. First of all, in his Hagdama, he spells out that he had the Meiri. What's so significant about this? This is the first time that that Meiri is in print. Now, he doesn't print the whole Meiri, but he uses the Meiri all the time. Now, earlier than this Sefer, there's no mention in a printed Sefer of the Meiri. There's a few times, the Shittim Kubetzes, a few times mentions it, but the Shittim Kubetzes, most of the Masechtas were not even printed around at 1766. They're coming out around then. So there's some Shittim Kubetzes, very little Meiri. This is the first time a Meiri is used throughout a Sefer, and he mentions in Hagdama that I have the Meiri. How does he have the Meiri? So it seems that the Meiri ended up in Italy. He's from Italy, this author, and we know that the Chidah, literally a few years later, his incredible travels called the Magal Taiv, describes how he saw the manuscript of the Meiri. And then the Meiri is not seen pretty much until it gets printed. Today, every base medrash has a set of Meiri, everyone has a set of Meiri, but for a long time, the Meiri is not available or not used. The next time the Miri comes to print is on Yoma, in its entirety, so to speak. First time actually is in 1885. But he uses the Miri. He uses the Ritva that I just mentioned was printed only a few years earlier. And the Taisus Yeshanim, he writes so much about the Taisus Yeshanim that he devotes a chelik of a sefer is to Masakin, the lashon of the Taisus Yeshanim, and recently looking into it, there was a recent edition based on another manuscript of the Taisus Yeshanim that came out in the 1990s, and he says is that it's interesting is that he was mamish on target in many of his corrections, even though he didn't have manuscripts. He was correcting this Apisvara. He was mechaven to the lashon many times. Correct his points were really on target in the lashon, his tikkun, which is a special talent that not everyone has. Now, what's also significant is, so first of all is, point number one is that he's using all the Rishonim that exist, that he had, that no one else had, Meiri. Taisus Yeshanim, which just comes onto the market, the Ritva comes on the market. He goes through every Rashi, every Taisus, he has what to say, he's dealing with Yerushalmis, Taiseftas, Taiskei Hanims, very pshat-oriented. It's full, literally everything, he talks about everything. It will be interesting to catalog his library because he quotes a Veltus Seforim, not only that, and it's extremely, what's the most significant, shot-oriented. It's not shtikl, not pulpul, and therefore that's why it helped the Sefer endure through the time till today. The various translations of the Shas use the Sefer. It's quoted in almost every footnote. Okay. And it became, basically, it was such a unique thing that it became the go-to achron on the Masechta. One last interesting point is that he quotes already in the introduction that he had a manuscript of a Rabbi Avram ben Musa, who was a Makubal that died in 1733. He was a great Makubal, very well-known gadol at that time, prolific writer, but none of his material was printed in his lifetime. He was extremely important in the world of Kabbalah in the North Africa world, and him and his son also was, and he wrote a lot. One sefer that he wrote was on Saita, which was printed 20-30 years ago by Havat Shalom, and when Daf Yomi learned Saita, it's a great sefer to use. And again, here the Sikh Yitzchak had the manuscript of this sefer. The way it works is, the world, people are always making discoveries. This manuscript actually came out 2-3 years ago. So one not only has, and now Sikh Yitzchak quotes it a few hundred times. Now I don't know if you could get it through Amazon, but I'm pretty sure it's available in print. You could get this sefer, which is also a very thorough pshat-oriented sefer, focusing on Rashi, Taisus, and the Gemara. Okay, that's the main famous achron called the Sikh Yitzchak. Now I want to, okay. Before I get to the Gvur Sari, one other sefer, which is very significant to talk about, and then we'll get to the Gvur Sari. I mentioned Rishonim. We said there's the Ritva, there's the Yeshanim. Now, there's a sefer. Again, you could get this. You could actually get online on Hebrew books. It's a Chachma, Rabbeinu El Yakum. It was printed in the 1950s from manuscript. It was printed by Rav Yanachovsky, and he printed it from manuscript. And the question is, what's so significant about this sefer? And it happens to be this sefer. It's a mapecha. What this sefer is about. Just to give a drop of background about this sefer, as follows. Hold on 1 second. In the 1860s, there was a sefer. There was a goyin. His name was Ramnasan Rabinovich. He started working on a sefer called the Dikduke Sefer, which, without getting into the barichos, was he collected the various nuschayos from manuscripts of the Talmud, and he printed on many Meseches. Each Masechta that he would go through, he would track down the many Rishonim that there were in manuscript. And a lot of times he had manuscripts that we only today get printed, but he had them ready then. Okay, not important for a different time. It's a whole interesting story how he gets all this, and he uses them in his Seforim, in his footnotes throughout the Sefer. Early on, he wrote notes on the Shem Hagdolim of the Chida. He talks about this Rabbi Yaakov, that he knows about this that is a manuscript of Rabbi Yaakov on Masechet Yoma. And in letters, he has letters with the various people. They were printed in a Yeshurun a bunch of years ago. Again, dealing with Rabbi Yaakov. In his Chidushei HaSari and Yoma, he says, I have this amazing sefer, this manuscript from Rabbi Yaakov, and I'm going to use it all the time, and he does, and he quotes pieces, Gersais, everything from it. So the question is, what is this so significant about this Rabbi Yaakov? The answer is as follows. Rabbi Yaakov is mamash a ben doire of Rashi. His age is very similar to Rashi. He learned by the same Rabbeim of Rashi. It's possible, according to some, that they might have even learned at the same time. They might have even learned Pechavrusa, there's a legend, such a thing, which it's very possible. It's not like far after. And it's brought down that he wrote on 4 sedarim of Shas, this Rishon, but it didn't survive. But Masechet Yoma was discovered. As I mentioned, the Chidushei HaSari was using it in his thing, and then the work in its entirety in the 1950s is printed. When you open up the sefer is written very, very similar to Rashi, extremely pshat, word for word every word in the Masechet. It's mamish gold what we have over here, a Rishon, and as I said, it's very thorough. It goes through the whole Masechet. It happens to be they discovered parts on Tainus was printed a bunch of years ago, and more recently, new parts on Tainus were printed. But as a whole, we are missing most of this Pirish. So what's so significant about it? Very interesting. This last point, and then we'll move on to the next sefer, is that we know Rashi didn't just come out of nowhere and write his Pirish. Today, it's established that there was existing Perushim beforehand. The Chachmei get the Talmidim of the Beis Medrash of the Maram of Roger Meir Goyla. Now they were known as the Chachmei of Mainz. What Rashi was able to do was he had an unbelievable koyach to take the material before. He was able to fine-tune it. He added in his own stuff also. We know this based on comparison of all the various different fragments and pieces that we have. And Rashi created what we have as Rashi, this incredible work that, timeless, gallistic pirish, maybe the greatest pirish on the Talmud that we have. But when we have this Yaakov and you learn the Masechta, so first of all you have a pirish besides Rashi going through word for word, line by line, mamish in the dur of Rashi, and you could see the difference because a lot of times you could see the difference between Rashi, they don't say it's the same thing, but you could see where they're all coming from. They come from the same world. In general, the point is, it's a good sefer. It's very good to look at. As I said, it's on Hebrew books, and you can look at it and gain a lot from it. Okay, and the last sefer that we'll just discuss is as follows: the Chidushei HaSari, the Sefer HaSari. Everyone very familiar with the Sefer HaSari. One of the Gedolei Olam of the Achronim, Ben Doira of the Gra, and he wrote a sefer, one of his Seforim that he's famous for, Sefer HaSari. Many people, it's famous, their Bar Mitzvah Shettel has to do with the Sefer HaSari. But he also wrote Seforim on Shas. The sefer, one of the Seforim that he wrote is on Masechtas Tainus. Another sefer that he wrote is on Masechtas Makkos. He wrote on Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. He wrote on Chagiga. And also Yoma. And now the sefer on Yoma was only printed for the first time in 1907. But who printed it? That's what's interesting. The Chafetz Chaim. What happened is as follows. The Chafetz Chaim was trying to make a mapecha in the world, as mentioned earlier, of Lima Kachim. So he felt that, and the Chafetz Chaim has a whole chibur, why the significance and the importance of learning kachim. But in order to learn, you need to have some kelim, svarim. the Chofetz Chaim went ahead and even he tracked down a few of the Chashav Achronim that existed on Kachim, and he reprinted them also. He found out that there was a Gvur Sari from the great Shag HaSari, one of the Go'ini Litta, and he made sure to print it. The Chofetz Chaim's son, in his incredible biography of his father, he writes that when my father found out that there was a Ksav Yad of the Shag HaSari in Yoma, and he made sure he did not rest. This incredible sefer, which ended up becoming extremely famous on this Masechet too, like everything else that he wrote. And this helped because the Chofetz Chaim held that the Kachim is extremely important, and we need to learn Kachim, and we need to have the Kalim. So one of the ways is if you have the Seforim. So the Chofetz Chaim went out of his way to track down the manuscript, and to print it, and through this Masechet we have the Gvur Sari. Now, just to be Messiah with one interesting thing is the Shag HaSari. What's the Mahalach of the Sefer? Again, the Sefer is extremely thorough, extremely intense, extremely be'indik. Very kedai if someone wants to learn even a sugya, one or two sugyas be'iyun while they're learning the daf. It's kedai to spend time, break your head over a shtickle from the Gvur Sari. And I'd like to end off, although the Shag HaSari is extremely famous, everyone knows about him, but there's an interesting quote about him that as is known, he lived for Arichas Yomim. He was a dayan in Metz, Seif Yoma, for many years in France, and there's a description over there when it talks about him that he was, okay, we know he was Baki and everything, he knew Shas, he knew Bavli Yerushalmi, but here's this interesting tzitut, a quote about him, which I find fascinating. First, it says that he knew everything, okay? Then it says, what did he know? So the list says as follows. This is written by someone in the city right before he dies, right after he dies. It says that he was Baki in Safra, Sifri, Tosefta, Sefer HaZoyar, Tikkune HaZoyar, Kabbalah, these are facts about him that are not all that well known. He didn't like to do nisim and stuff like that, pu'ulas, but it was known. This is what it says in this source, that there was a mice over there that he did with a kameya, and just to end off, he was murdik. He used to sat and learned with talis and tefillin the whole day. He used to fast a lot, and he learned seder, shas balpeh, Sefer HaZoyar, and he was Baki in Kisvei Arizal. Now, why am I quoting all this? It's known, everyone knows that the Shag HaSari was unbelievable going in Torah and Nigla. This shows him in a whole different light, that not like the same person, his dar, the Vilna Gaon. It's known that they both shared a great Talmud with Chaim Volozhiner. So some people say the Gra was the Gra in Nistar, and the Shag HaSari was the Gaon in Nigla. There's such a statement. But here we see that the Shag HaSari also had plenty what to do with in Nistar too. And those are some of the interesting Seforim and material that's kedai to know about on the Masechet a little bit.
That sounds very, very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing, especially some history about the Siach Yitzchak and about Rabbi Yakim. And just to wrap it up, there's somebody in Lakewood named Rabbi Chaim Weissman who's done a lot of work on the Gvur Sari. He's actually written a sefer on Yoma called Teres Yoma, and he's done a lot of work on the Gvur Sari. It should be available soon. I know the Masechet has already started. Perhaps by now it's out. So if anybody wants to get in touch with him, his email address is Machon, SAMACHONSA @thejnet.com. They can be in touch with one of us for more information about getting that sefer as well. Okay, so thank you very much, Rabbi Brodt. Looking forward to hearing you perhaps on this Masechtas. Maybe you have some other things up your sleeve you want to share with us. Feel free. We're always looking forward to hearing some more interesting historical information on any Masechta as we go through the Daf Yomi cycle.